The rescue at the gala. The grand ballroom of the Silverton Hotel glittered with the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Mason Reed stood near the champagne bar, tugging at his tie and wishing he was literally anywhere else. His firm had contributed to the charity gala, which meant his presence was mandatory. He wore it like an ill-fitting suit, uncomfortable and counting the minutes until he could leave. Then she caught his eye. Isabella Vance stood across the room in an emerald dress that seemed to have been created specifically to make the world stop. Her dark hair fell in waves down her back, and she was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. The man beside her, handsome in that forgettable way, was talking loudly about his yacht and his vacation homes. Isabella was nodding, but Mason could see the light dimming in her expression with each word. He didn't mean to stare. He definitely didn't mean to care. But when the man leaned close and whispered something that made Isabella flinch, something shifted in Mason's chest. The man laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound, and Isabella looked down at her champagne glass as if it held the answers to the universe. Mason moved without thinking. He crossed the ballroom with purpose, introduced himself to Isabella with a warm smile, and somehow convinced her date that his colleague needed an urgent word with him about a business deal. The man, relieved to escape what was clearly a boring evening, disappeared into the crowd. Isabella looked at him with something between gratitude and confusion. That was necessary, Mason finished. Your date seemed more interested in his boat than in you. A real smile appeared then, transforming her entire face. He really was something, wasn't he? My friend set this up. She owes me. Let me make it up to you, Mason said, offering his hand. Dance with me instead. On the dance floor, with the soft glow of chandeliers above them, Isabella told him about her startup, about the vision she had for sustainable technology, about her dreams. Mason listened, actually listened, asking questions, showing genuine interest. She blossomed under his attention, and he found himself mesmerized by her passion, her intelligence, the way her entire being seemed to light up when she talked about something she believed in. Her hand rested on his shoulder as they swayed to the music, and he could smell her perfume, something floral and delicate that made him forget to breathe properly. When she looked up at him, her eyes reflected the chandelier light, and Mason realized he'd never seen anything more beautiful. You're easy to talk to, Isabella said softly. Most people don't really listen. They just wait for their turn to speak. I'm listening, Mason replied, meaning every word. The dance seemed to last both forever and not nearly long enough. When the music faded, Isabella's hand lingered in his for a moment longer than necessary before she pulled away. Thank you, she said, for rescuing me from that disaster. Anytime, Mason said, and he meant it. Later, on the balcony where the night air was cool and the city spread below them like a promise, Isabella stood beside him watching the lights twinkle in the darkness. The sounds of the gala muffled behind them felt like they existed in a separate world. Can I ask you something? Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Anything, Mason replied. Why did you help me? You didn't have to. Mason turned to face her. In the moonlight, her skin seemed to glow, and her dark eyes were searching his for something he wasn't sure he could provide. Because it was the right thing to do, he said honestly. And because the moment I saw how that man was treating you, I couldn't stand it. Isabella stepped closer, drawn to him like gravity. Mason's breath caught as she moved nearer, until they were almost touching. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could hear the slight change in her breathing. Mason, she whispered, his name sounding like a question on her lips. He lifted his hand and gently tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm, and when she leaned into his touch, his heart began to race. Isabella's eyes fluttered closed as his hand moved to cup her face. She was so close now that he could feel her breath against his skin, could see the faint pulse at the base of her neck. This was the moment. Everything was building toward it. The dance, the conversation, the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the world. Mason leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, to create distance. Isabella didn't pull away. His lips were barely a whisper away from hers when something made him pause. A voice inside him whispered that this moment was too sacred to rush, that Isabella deserved more than a stolen kiss on a balcony at a party where neither of them fully understood what was happening between them. With tremendous effort, Mason pulled back, his hands still framing her face, his breathing ragged. Isabella's eyes opened slowly, dazed and confused. "Why did you stop?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because you deserve clarity," Mason said softly. "Not just a moment of passion born from champagne and starlight. You deserve someone who is sure." Isabella reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. "What if I'm sure?" she asked. But Mason gently took her hand and held it between them, needing the physical barrier to maintain his resolve. "Then we'll know it in the morning," he said gently. "We'll know it when there's no magic of the gala to cloud our judgment." Isabella looked like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to pull him back and finish what they'd started. But instead, she nodded slowly, accepting his wisdom even as her body ached for his. As the night wore on and they returned to the gala, Isabella was quieter, more thoughtful. She stayed close to Mason, her hand occasionally brushing his, her eyes following him whenever she thought he wasn't looking. When it was finally time for the evening to end, Mason walked Isabella to her car. At the door, she turned to face him one final time. "Will I see you again?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made his chest ache. "Yes," Mason promised. "I'm certain of it." As she drove away, Isabella watched him in her rearview mirror, growing smaller but never disappearing from her mind. She touched her lips where his had almost been, and finally allowed herself to admit the truth she'd been running from for months. She was falling for Mason Reed. And tomorrow, she would begin her campaign to make him see her the way she'd already learned to see him, with complete, undeniable love. The signs he missed. The coffee arrived at Mason's desk on a Tuesday morning, exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, oat milk, a hint of vanilla. He didn't remember mentioning his preference to Isabella, but he assumed she must have overheard him ordering somewhere. He thought nothing of it. Then it happened again. And again. Isabella began texting him about projects, but the messages shifted from purely professional to something warmer. She'd send him articles she thought he'd find interesting. She'd ask about his weekend. She remembered that he'd mentioned struggling with insomnia and sent him a link to a meditation app with a note. Thought this might help. "Take care of yourself, Mason." At the office, their encounters became strangely orchestrated. Isabella would appear in the hallway just as he was heading to lunch, suggesting they grab something together. She'd linger in meetings longer than necessary, positioning herself near him. Once, when they were reviewing a proposal, her shoulder brushed his and she didn't pull away immediately. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Mason's colleague, Derek, nudged him one afternoon. "So, Isabella Vance. She's into you." Mason laughed, genuinely confused. "What? No, we're just friendly. Mate, she looks at you like you hung the moon. It's obvious." But Mason dismissed it. Isabella was his superior in some ways, brilliant, driven, with resources he didn't have. The idea that she'd be interested in him seemed absurd. He told himself she was simply being nice, that he was reading too much into casual gestures. One evening, Isabella asked him to review some documents at her apartment. It was a reasonable request. The files were sensitive, not meant for the office. Mason agreed without hesitation. Her apartment was exactly what he expected, modern, elegant, filled with books and plants. She made tea and sat beside him on the sofa, closer than strictly necessary. As they worked through the documents, their hands brushed. Isabella didn't move away. Instead, she turned slightly toward him, her knee touching his. "Mason," she said softly, "do you ever think about things outside of work?" His mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you ever think about us? About whether there could be something more?" Panic and confusion flooded him. He stood abruptly, creating distance. "Isabella, I care about you, but..." She looked wounded, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything." The drive home was torture. Mason replayed every interaction, every moment, every gentle touch. Suddenly, all the coffee runs, all the thoughtful messages, all the coincidental encounters crystallized into a pattern he'd been willfully blind to. Isabella Vance was in love with him, and Mason had no idea what to do about it. The office was empty at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. Rain hammered against the windows as Isabella sat at her desk, staring at her laptop without seeing anything. She'd been avoiding Mason for a week since her clumsy confession at her apartment. He'd been avoiding her too, and the tension was suffocating. She couldn't live like this anymore, caught between hope and despair, between the possibility of love and the certainty of heartbreak. When Mason stepped out of the elevator, Isabella's heart stopped. He was soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his expression determined. Her office door was open and he walked straight in, closing it behind him. "We need to talk," he said. Isabella stood, her legs unsteady. "Mason, I'm sorry about last week. I put you in an awkward position and I shouldn't have." "Why didn't you tell me?" he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "At the gala, when you first started showing interest, why didn't you just tell me?" She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because you didn't see me that way. And I was terrified of losing you completely." "Isabella," his voice was closer now. "Look at me." She turned. He stood a few feet away, rain still dripping from his jacket, his dark eyes searching hers. "I've been thinking about everything," Mason continued. "The coffee. The messages. The way you look at me. I've been thinking about that night at the gala, about how you felt in my arms when we danced. And I realized something." "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I realized that I've been running from something I felt but didn't understand. When you confessed, it scared me because suddenly all those moments made sense. And I didn't know how to feel about that." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "And now?" Mason stepped closer. "Now I'm terrified. You're brilliant and ambitious, and you deserve someone who can see you clearly. I was your assistant, Isabella. There's a power dynamic here that makes this complicated." "I don't care about complicated," Isabella said fiercely. "I care about you. I've cared about you for months. I see you, Mason, your intelligence, your kindness, the way you notice things others miss. You make me want to be better." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. His hand lingered there, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with unbearable tenderness. "You terrify me," he whispered. "Good," Isabella breathed, stepping closer. "You terrify me too." The space between them evaporated. His hand moved to the back of her neck, and has found his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palm. They were so close now that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the rain and something distinctly Mason, something that made her dizzy. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away. Isabella didn't. Instead, she leaned in, closing the final distance, and then their lips were almost touching. "If we do this," Mason murmured against her mouth, "there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," Isabella whispered. For one perfect moment, suspended in time and rain and the thunder of their heartbeats, they were on the precipice. His lips brushed hers, soft, questioning, reverent, and Isabella felt like she was falling and flying simultaneously. But then, with tremendous effort, Mason pulled back. His breathing was ragged, his hands trembling slightly as he held her shoulders. "Not like this," he said hoarsely. "Not here, not now. You deserve better than a moment born from panic and confusion. You deserve clarity. We both do." Isabella's eyes opened, dazed and disappointed. "Mason." "I need time to process this," he said gently. "We need time. Real time. Not just stolen moments in your office." She nodded slowly, understanding even as her body ached for him. "I'll figure this out," he promised. "Just give me a little time." As he left her office, Isabella sank back into her chair, her fingers touching her lips where his had almost been. The almost kiss burned hotter than any kiss ever could. The internal battle. Mason didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, replaying the moment in Isabella's office over and over. The softness of her skin, the tremor in her voice, the desperate longing in her eyes. His phone buzzed with messages from friends, from work, from life, and he ignored all of them. By morning, he'd made a decision. He was going to quit. It was the only logical solution. Isabella had confessed her feelings. The professional relationship was compromised. If he stepped back, gave her space, maybe this infatuation would fade and they could both move forward. He'd update his resume, start looking for another position, make a clean break. Except he couldn't do it. On his lunch break, Mason walked past Isabella's office building twice. The third time, he went inside. She was at her desk, working intently, and when she looked up and saw him, her expression shifted through surprise, hope, and then careful neutrality. "We need to talk," he said again, closing the door. Isabella stood. "If you're coming to tell me you're leaving, don't. Please." "I was going to," Mason admitted. "But I couldn't. And I've spent the last 36 hours trying to figure out why." He paced her office, running his hand through his hair. "You said I make you want to be better. Well, you do the same to me. You have for months. I think I've been in denial about it because it felt safer to pretend I was just being professional, just being kind." Isabella watched him, not speaking. "But the truth is, I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my day. When you send me those messages, my entire mood changes. When you laugh at something I say, I feel like I've accomplished something real. And when you touched me in your office." He stopped, shaking his head. "I've never felt anything like that before." "So what are you saying?" Isabella asked softly. "I'm saying that all those moments you were trying to tell me something, I was listening. I just didn't want to hear it because acknowledging it meant having to admit something I wasn't ready to face." He moved toward her. "I was ready to throw away the best thing in my life because I was scared. But I'm done being scared." Isabella's breath caught. "Mason." "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since that night at the gala, but I was too blind to see it. You saw me. You've always seen me. And now that I finally see you, really see you, I can't imagine not being with you." Isabella closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for his face. "Say that again." "I'm in love with you, Isabella." She kissed him before he could say another word. It was urgent and passionate, months of longing pouring out in that single connection. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she responded by running her fingers through his hair, deepening the kiss. They broke apart breathless, and Isabella rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much." Mason tilted her chin up and kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every second. His hands traced the curve of her spine, and she melted into him, her entire body responding to his touch. When they finally separated, they were both trembling. "What happens now?" Isabella asked, her fingers still tangled in his hair. Mason smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made her heart flip. "Now we figure it out together. No more hiding. No more pretending. Just us." Isabella pulled him close again, burying her face in his neck. "Just us," she repeated like a promise. For the first time, Mason felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The rooftop of Isabella's office building was their place now. They came here when they wanted to escape the world, to exist in the bubble they'd created together. Tonight, the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, painting the sky like a masterpiece, and the city below was beginning to twinkle with lights. Isabella sat between Mason's legs, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. It had been 3 weeks since he'd confessed his love in her office. 3 weeks of stolen kisses, long conversations, and the delicious discovery of each other. "I still can't believe you didn't see it," Isabella teased, tilting her head back to look at him. "I was so obvious. The coffee, the texts, practically throwing myself at you at the gala." Mason laughed, kissing the top of her head. "I was an idiot. A beautiful, stupid idiot." "You were blind," she corrected, reaching back to touch his face. "Completely and utterly blind." "Only to you," he murmured, turning her around in his arms so they faced each other. "Now I see you clearly, Isabella. I see everything. Your passion, your strength, your vulnerability. I see the woman who pretended not to care what that awful man said at the gala, but who was actually devastated by his cruelty. I see the woman who risks everything to build something meaningful. I see the woman I'm in love with." Isabella's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Don't be scared," Mason said, pulling her closer. "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, and it was different from their previous kisses. It was deeper, more intimate, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through to get here. Isabella responded with equal passion, her hands sliding under his shirt to feel the warmth of his skin. Mason groaned softly into her mouth and lifted her slightly, pulling her into his lap. They kissed until breathing became necessary, their foreheads touching, their heartbeats synchronizing. "Take me home," Isabella whispered. Mason's apartment was dark and cool when they stumbled through the door, still kissing, still touching. Articles of clothing were left in a trail, her jacket, his tie, her blouse. By the time they reached his bedroom, they were both breathing heavily, desperate and trembling with anticipation. Mason laid her back on his bed, the city lights streaming through the window casting her in silver. He took a moment to look at her, really look at her, committing every detail to memory. "You're beautiful," he breathed. Isabella reached up and pulled him down to her. "I need you," she said urgently. "I've needed you for so long." He kissed her deeply as he moved inside her, and Isabella gasped, her eyes widening. There was a moment of perfect stillness, and then they began to move together, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. Isabella's hands gripped his back, her nails leaving marks, and she whispered his name over and over like a prayer. Mason buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her, feeling completely consumed by her. Every touch, every kiss, every gasp was a confession. He wanted to merge with her, to erase any distance between them. "I love you," Isabella cried out, and Mason felt her tighten around him as she reached her peak. He followed moments later, spilling into her with a groan of ecstasy, her name on his lips. They lay tangled together afterward, Isabella's head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Her hand rested over his heart, feeling it gradually slow. "That was..." Isabella started. "Perfect," Mason finished. "You're perfect." She propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, her dark hair cascading over her shoulder, her expression soft and vulnerable in the darkness. Mason reached up and tucked a strand behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you," he said quietly. Isabella shook her head. "You see me now. That's all that matters." She leaned down and kissed him tenderly, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back down against his chest. They lay like that as the night deepened around them, as the city lights below danced and flickered. Hours later, as dawn began to break, Isabella woke to find Mason already awake, watching her sleep. She smiled sleepily and reached up to kiss him. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love," he replied, and the words felt like a vow. They made love again as the sun rose, slowly and sweetly, with a kind of tenderness that comes from knowing someone completely and being known in return. When they finally lay still, they were wrapped around each other so completely it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. "Marry me," Isabella said suddenly. Mason pulled back to look at her. "What?" "Marry me," she repeated, her eyes shining. "I've waited months for you to see me. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Mason's answer was to kiss her deeply, passionately, pouring all his love into that single moment. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "Yes," he said. 1,000 times, yes. Isabella laughed, a sound of pure joy, and Mason kissed her again, holding her like she was his entire world. And in that moment, on a bed bathed in golden morning light, with the city awakening below them, he finally understood what it meant to truly see someone. Isabella Vance had shown him how to love. And he was never going to be blind again. The end.